He was not a famous man, not someone the world noticed when he walked by. He lived a quiet life, waking up early in the morning, going to work, and returning home to a small apartment. To most people, he was invisible, just another face in the crowd. He was the kind of man you might pass on the street without ever remembering. But sometimes life hides great strength in the most ordinary people, waiting for the right moment to reveal it. He worked long hours at a job that paid enough to survive but never enough to make him feel comfortable. He wore simple clothes, ate simple meals, and rarely treated himself to anything fancy. Still, he was content. He wasn't bitter about his life. He carried himself with quiet dignity, the kind of dignity that doesn't shout but is always there. He believed in working hard, in minding his own business, and in helping people when he could. Every day seemed the same. He would wake up before sunrise, drink a cup of tea, and take the same route to work. His neighbors often saw him and greeted him politely, though no one really knew him well. He didn't post pictures online, he didn't chase attention, and he didn't try to impress anyone. To him, life was not about showing off. It was about surviving, about doing what was right, and about keeping a clean conscience. Sometimes when he sat alone at night, he wondered if his life meant anything. He had no great achievements to boast about, no medals, no awards. He was not rich, he was not powerful, and he was not admired by crowds. But in his heart, he carried something many people forget. He carried kindness. He believed that if someone was in trouble and he could help, then he should help. He never imagined that one day this simple belief would push him into the center of a moment that would change his life forever. People around him often underestimated him. Some thought he was too quiet, too ordinary to make any difference in the world. But ordinary people often carry extraordinary courage, and no one knows it until the moment of truth arrives. His courage was sleeping inside him, waiting hidden beneath his simple clothes and quiet routines. That evening, like many others, he was driving home after work. The roads were half empty, the sky painted with the last colors of the sunset. He hummed softly to himself, thinking about dinner, maybe a quiet evening with a book. Nothing unusual, nothing exciting, just another normal day. He had no idea that within minutes everything would change. His life until that point had been like a still lake, calm and predictable. But destiny doesn't ask for permission before it strikes. Sometimes it arrives suddenly, crashing into ordinary lives like a storm. And it had chosen him. He didn't see himself as a hero. He didn't dream of making headlines or being remembered. In truth, he sometimes felt small in a world full of powerful people. But that night, when the world needed a hero, it would not look for a famous name. It would not call for a soldier or a politician. It would turn to an ordinary man, a man who lived quietly but carried bravery deep inside. He didn't know it yet, but his life was about to collide with fire, with fear, and with fate. He was about to be tested in a way that would reveal who he truly was. And in that test, his ordinary mask would fall away, and the world would see something extraordinary hiding underneath. Because sometimes, heroes do not wear uniforms, they do not walk red carpets, and they do not live in mansions. Sometimes they are just ordinary men, living ordinary lives until the moment comes when they must act. And when that moment came for him, he would not hesitate. It was a quiet evening, the kind of evening where the city seemed to slow down. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, and the streetlights glowed like lonely sentinels along the highway. He drove steadily, lost in his thoughts, humming softly to the rhythm of the car engine. To him, it was just another ride home after a long day. But fate had already placed something in his path that would change the course of his life. As he turned a bend on the highway, the smell of smoke suddenly reached his nose. At first he thought it was just someone burning trash nearby or maybe a factory releasing fumes. But within seconds he saw it. Thick black smoke rising ahead, curling angrily into the night sky. His eyes widened. Something was wrong. As he drove closer, the shape of the scene came into view. A police car, twisted and broken, had crashed against a barrier on the side of the road. The front of the vehicle was crushed, flames licking up from under the hood. The fire crackled and spat sparks into the dark, and the orange glow lit up the surroundings like a warning beacon. He slowed down, his heart pounding. His first instinct was disbelief. Was this real? Had he really stumbled across such a disaster? But as he got nearer, the sound of muffled shouting pierced the night. The officer inside was trapped. The window glass was shattered, and through the smoke he could see a figure struggling, The officer's hands beat weakly against the door, trying to push it open, but the metal was jammed. Flames spread quickly, reaching toward the cabin, and smoke filled the interior like a suffocating blanket. The man's knuckles tightened around the steering wheel. He glanced around. Other cars slowed down, some even stopped for a moment to watch, but no one moved closer. Drivers shook their heads, some lifted their phones to record, but no one stepped forward. Fear had frozen them. The fire was too dangerous, the risk too great. He could feel his pulse racing, his breath quickening. A voice inside him whispered, "Drive away. Someone else will handle this. The fire trucks will come." But another voice, louder, pushed against it. "There's no time. The officer will die." For a moment, the world seemed to pause, as though waiting for him to make a choice. The smoke thickened. The officer's movements grew weaker, and the fire roared louder. His decision was made. He swerved his car to the side, pulled over, and flung the door open. Without thinking about his own safety, he ran straight toward the burning vehicle. Heat rushed against his face, the smell of burning rubber and gasoline filling his lungs. Each step closer felt like stepping into an oven, but he didn't stop. The officer inside looked up, eyes wide with fear and disbelief. Through the cracked window, their eyes met. In that instant, something passed between them. Desperation on one side, determination on the other. He tried the door handle first, yanking with all his strength, but it didn't budge. The metal was bent, warped by the crash. Flames licked closer, forcing him to step back for a second, but he pushed forward again. He pressed his shoulder against the door, gritting his teeth, and shoved with everything he had. The metal screeched, bending slightly, but still wouldn't open. The officer coughed, choking on the smoke, his voice faint. "Help, please." Those words lit a fire inside the man, stronger than the flames outside. He refused to give up. He grabbed a rock from the ground and smashed it against the remaining glass. Shards flew everywhere, cutting his arm, but he ignored the sting. He reached in, grabbed the officer's arm, and pulled. The officer was pinned by the seatbelt. With trembling fingers, he fumbled, found the buckle, and unlatched it. The flames roared louder now, the car shaking as the fire consumed it. The man knew he had seconds, maybe less. With a final heave, he pulled the officer through the window, dragging him out into the fresh air just as the fire leapt into the cabin. They stumbled back together, coughing, falling onto the asphalt. The officer lay gasping, his uniform singed, his hands trembling. The man's face was streaked with soot, his arms bleeding from the glass cuts, but he was alive. They both were alive. Behind them, the police car erupted into an explosion, flames shooting into the sky. The ground shook beneath them, the heat blazing against their backs. If they had been inside for just a few seconds longer, it would have been the end. The man sat there, chest heaving, his mind spinning. He hadn't thought. He hadn't planned. He had simply acted, and that action had made the difference between life and death. Drivers who had stood frozen now rushed forward, some with cameras still rolling, others calling for paramedics. Voices shouted, sirens wailed in the distance, but for a moment the world was quiet to him. He looked at the officer beside him, barely conscious, and realized what had just happened. He had saved a life. And though he didn't know it yet, the echoes of that moment would not fade with the smoke. By the next day, they would return to him in a way he could never have imagined. The smoke was everywhere now, thick and choking, rising into the night like a warning no one could ignore. The flames danced higher, crackling with the sound of destruction, and the smell of burning fuel filled the air. Cars slowed as they passed, their headlights cutting through the haze. Some drivers honked nervously, others lifted their phones to record. But no one stepped out. Everyone watched, but no one acted. The man stood frozen for a second, his breath caught in his throat. His hands trembled as he gripped the steering wheel. He knew exactly what he was seeing, a police officer trapped in a burning car. He could hear faint banging against the window, muffled cries through the smoke. Every instinct screamed at him to get out, to do something. Yet another voice whispered in the back of his mind, "Don't, it's too dangerous. You'll die." His heart pounded. His mind raced through 1,000 thoughts. What if the car exploded? What if the fire spread to him? What if he didn't make it out? He imagined the flames swallowing him, the smoke stealing his breath. Fear gripped him, heavy and real. But then another thought broke through the fear. What if I drive away? What if I leave him there? The image was unbearable. He saw the officer's eyes through the cracked window, wide, desperate, begging silently for help. And he knew, deep inside, that if he drove away now, he would carry that image for the rest of his life. He would never be able to forget it. He would never forgive himself. Time seemed to slow down. The world outside his car was chaos. Sirens faint in the distance, the fire roaring louder, people shouting. But inside his mind, everything was quiet. He felt the weight of the choice pressing down on him, like the world itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what he would do. He thought about his life, about how ordinary it had always been. He had never done anything remarkable, never stood out, never felt like he truly mattered. And here, in this moment, life was offering him a chance to do something that mattered, a chance to step forward when everyone else was stepping back. His hands loosened from the steering wheel. His breath steadied. The fear was still there, clawing at him, but something stronger began to rise above it. Courage. Not the loud, flashy courage of movies, but the quiet kind. The kind that comes from a simple truth. If I can help, I must. Without thinking anymore, he flung open his car door. The cold night air rushed in, mixed with the searing heat from the flames ahead. He didn't pause. He didn't give himself time to change his mind. His legs carried him forward, each step faster, until he was running straight toward the fire. People on the roadside shouted at him. "Stop, don't go near it," someone cried. Another yelled, "The car could blow." But he didn't listen. Their words blurred into noise behind him. All he could see was the officer, still trapped, still pounding weakly against the window, his strength fading with every second. As he reached the car, the heat slammed into him like a wall. His skin stung, sweat poured down his face, and smoke filled his lungs. He coughed violently, but he pressed forward, shielding his face with his arm. The flames roared just feet away, but he kept his eyes locked on the officer. He tried the driver's door first, yanking at the handle with all his strength. It didn't move. The crash had bent the frame, trapping it shut. He cursed under his breath, coughing, his lungs burning. The officer inside was slumped now, barely moving. He had to make a choice again, step back, wait for help, or keep fighting. And just like before, the answer was clear. He clenched his teeth, braced his shoulder against the door, and shoved with everything he had. The metal groaned but didn't give. His fear screamed at him to stop, but his heart screamed louder. Not yet. Don't give up. He grabbed a large piece of debris from the ground and smashed it against the window. Glass shattered, spraying his arms with sharp shards. He ignored the pain. He reached inside, his hands finding the officer's arm. The man inside was barely conscious, coughing weakly, eyes glazed with smoke. "I've got you," the rescuer gasped, his voice hoarse. "Hold on." The seatbelt was still locked, pinning the officer down. With trembling fingers, he found the buckle, pressed it, and finally it clicked open. He pulled with all his strength, dragging the officer through the broken window. The flames screamed louder, licking dangerously close, but at last the officer slid out, collapsing against him. Together, they stumbled back, away from the car. They had barely made it 10 steps when a deafening explosion split the air. The car burst into a fireball, flames shooting high into the sky. The ground trembled beneath them. The shockwave knocked them both to the ground. He shielded the officer with his body, protecting him from flying debris. His chest heaved, his arms burned, but he didn't care. The officer was alive. He had chosen, and he had been just in time. Lying there on the asphalt, coughing, he realized something. He had never felt more alive. In that split second, when fear and courage battled inside him, he had made the choice that defined him. He was no longer just an ordinary man. He was the man who had chosen to act when no one else would. And though the world around him was chaos, in his heart there was only one quiet, powerful truth. Sometimes one choice can change everything. The fire was alive. It roared like a beast, snapping and spitting sparks into the night, as if warning him to stay away. The heat was unbearable, pressing against his skin like invisible hands trying to push him back. Every breath was a battle, the smoke burning his lungs, scratching his throat until he coughed violently. His eyes watered, but still he moved forward. He had no plan, only determination. The officer inside the car was fading fast. His head leaned weakly against the cracked glass, his movements slowing, his body growing heavy. The flames crawled closer, wrapping around the car like hungry arms. The man knew he didn't have minutes, he had seconds. He yanked at the driver's door again, his muscles straining, veins standing out in his arms. The metal screeched but refused to give way. The wreckage was too tight, twisted from the crash. His shoulder slammed against it once, twice, 3 times, each time sending pain shooting through his body. Still nothing. The fire roared louder, mocking him, daring him to give up. For a moment, despair flickered in his mind. I can't do this. It's too late. But then he heard a faint sound from inside the car. A weak cough, a desperate gasp for air. That sound lit a fire inside him stronger than the flames outside. No. Not while he's still alive. He spun to the passenger side, shielded his face with his arm, and smashed his fist against the half-broken glass. It cracked further but didn't break. He grabbed a heavy piece of debris from the road, a metal shard from the crash, and slammed it against the window with all his strength. This time the glass shattered, exploding into tiny shards that cut his arms. Blood mixed with sweat dripping down his skin, but he didn't feel it. He reached in immediately, ignoring the jagged edges that tore into his hands. The officer's eyes flickered open, dazed and full of fear. The man shouted hoarsely through the smoke, "I've got you! Don't give up!" His voice was raw, but it carried the strength the officer needed to hear. He tugged at the officer's arm, but the seatbelt held him tightly. The strap was locked, stiff from the heat. The man reached down, coughing, his vision blurring from the smoke. His fingers fumbled over the buckle, slippery with sweat. For a terrifying moment, it wouldn't move. He gritted his teeth, his lungs screaming for clean air, and forced it. At last, it clicked open. The officer slumped forward, his weight collapsing into the man's arms. He pulled hard, dragging him out inch by inch through the jagged frame of the window. The officer groaned in pain, but he was alive, breathing. The man felt glass slice his clothes, cut into his skin, but he didn't stop. Every second felt like an eternity. Every sound of the fire reminded him that time was running out. Finally, with one last desperate heave, he pulled the officer free. They fell together onto the asphalt, coughing, gasping, their bodies trembling from the heat. For a brief moment, relief washed over him. He had done it. He had pulled him out, but the danger wasn't over. The car groaned, metal twisting from the heat, the fire spreading wildly. He grabbed the officer under the arms and dragged him farther away, his muscles screaming in protest. Step by step, inch by inch, he pulled him along the ground. His lungs felt like they were on fire. His vision swam, but he refused to stop. They had barely moved 20 feet when the world erupted. The police car exploded behind them with a deafening roar. The ground shook violently, a wave of heat blasting against their backs. Shards of metal and glass flew through the air like bullets. Instinctively, the man threw himself over the officer, shielding him with his own body. The impact knocked the wind out of him, but he held on, his arms wrapped tightly around the man he had saved. For a few long seconds, the night was nothing but chaos, fire, smoke, flying debris. And then, slowly, silence returned, broken only by the sound of their ragged breathing. The man rolled onto his back, staring up at the dark sky, his chest rising and falling like waves. His body ached, his skin stung, his clothes were scorched, but he was alive. More importantly, the officer beside him was alive too. His chest rose weakly with each breath, proof that he had been pulled from death's grip in the final second. People finally ran toward them now, shouting, pointing, some with their phones still recording. Someone yelled for paramedics, another rushed with a bottle of water. But the man barely heard them. His ears rang from the explosion, his body numb from exhaustion. He turned his head to look at the officer. Their eyes met again, this time not through broken glass, but face to face. The officer whispered something faint, his voice trembling, almost lost in the noise. "Thank you." The man nodded, unable to find words. His throat was raw, his mind still spinning. But deep down he knew one thing. In that moment he had done what mattered. He had faced fire and fear, and he had not turned away. And though he had no way of knowing, this act, the night he went into the flames to save another, was only the beginning. Tomorrow his phone would ring, and life as he knew it would never be the same again. The fire still burned behind them, sending waves of heat into the night sky. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with every passing second. The man sat on the ground, his chest rising and falling, his arms covered in cuts, his clothes scorched and smelling of smoke. Beside him the officer lay flat, coughing, his face pale but alive. People who had once only watched from a distance now rushed toward the scene. Some carried phones, their screens glowing as they filmed. Others shouted into their devices, calling for ambulances, police backup, and fire engines. A few knelt beside the man and the officer, offering bottles of water, their hands trembling as they poured it over their faces to wash away the soot. The man barely noticed them. His ears still rang from the explosion. His throat burned from the smoke. All he could do was sit there, staring at the officer he had just pulled from the jaws of death. He had never been so close to fire, never been so close to danger, yet somehow he had survived it. And so had the officer. The officer tried to speak, his voice rough and broken. "You saved me," he whispered, each word costing him breath. His hand reached out weakly, gripping the man's wrist with surprising strength for someone so exhausted. The man shook his head, his voice hoarse. "No, I just did what anyone would do." But deep down he knew that wasn't true. Not everyone would have stopped. Not everyone would have run into the flames. Most people had stayed back, too afraid. It was his choice, his split-second decision that had made the difference. By the time paramedics arrived, the flames had consumed what little was left of the police car. The ground was scattered with twisted metal and broken glass. The rescuers pushed through the crowd, rushing to stabilize the officer. They placed an oxygen mask over his face, checked his pulse, and carefully lifted him onto a stretcher. Cameras flashed around them as reporters shouted questions. One paramedic turned to the man, pointing at his bleeding arms and smoke-blackened face. "You need treatment too." The man shook his head. "I'm fine. Take care of him first." But his legs wobbled when he stood, and the paramedics had to steady him. His adrenaline was fading now, and the pain began to set in. Burns on his skin, cuts stinging, his chest tight from the smoke. He realized he wasn't invincible. He had risked his life, and the scars would remind him of it. The crowd buzzed with excitement. Strangers clapped, some shouted, "Hero!" while others filmed every second. The man felt uncomfortable under their gaze. He hadn't done this for applause. He hadn't done it to be recorded or praised. He had done it because someone needed help. That was all. As the ambulance doors closed with the officer inside, the man stood quietly, watching it drive away. The flashing red and blue lights lit up his tired face, making him look like part of the very story he had just created. He didn't smile, didn't wave. He just stood there trying to understand what had just happened. Police officers soon arrived to secure the area. One of them approached him, his expression filled with respect. "Sir," he said firmly, "what you did tonight, most people wouldn't have. You saved one of our own. You should know this won't be forgotten." The man nodded silently, but in his heart he felt no pride, only relief. Relief that the officer was alive. Relief that he hadn't been too late. Relief that he had listened to courage instead of fear. When the fire was finally under control and the crowd began to disperse, the man slipped away quietly. He didn't stay for interviews, didn't wait for recognition. He returned to his car, the same car he had driven every night, and sat behind the wheel staring at his trembling hands. His body ached, but it was his heart that felt the heaviest. He had just lived through something he would never forget. As he drove home, the city lights blurred past him. He replayed the moment again and again, the flames, the officer's desperate eyes, the explosion behind them. He wondered if he had really done it, or if it had all been a dream. But the cuts on his arms, the smell of smoke in his clothes, and the exhaustion in his bones told him it was real. That night, when he finally lay down in bed, sleep refused to come. He stared at the ceiling, the image of the burning car burning itself into his memory. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know that his actions had already begun spreading across the city, across social media, across the news. He didn't know that strangers were already calling him a hero, that headlines were being written, that his face was being shared. He didn't know that the world was watching. All he knew was that one life had been saved. And for him, that was enough. What he didn't realize was that the aftermath of tonight was only the beginning. Tomorrow would come with a phone call, one that would shake his world in ways he never imagined. By morning, the city was already buzzing. The quiet man who had slipped away from the burning wreck the night before was now at the center of a storm he never asked for. He woke up to the sound of his phone vibrating on the nightstand, dozens of messages flashing across the screen. Friends, co-workers, and even neighbors he barely knew had written the same words. "You're everywhere." Still half asleep, he rubbed his eyes and scrolled through his phone. His heart skipped a beat. There it was, his face, his actions replayed again and again on social media. Someone in the crowd had filmed the rescue, capturing every second. The flames, his desperate struggle with the car door, the moment he pulled the officer out, and the explosion that came just after. The video had spread like wildfire, shared millions of times overnight. Headlines screamed across news feeds. Ordinary man saves cop from fiery crash. Others read, hero risked his life when no one else would. Some simply called him the man in the flames. The video showed what he had done, but it didn't capture everything. It didn't show the fear that had gripped him. It didn't show the moment he almost walked away. It didn't show the pain from the cuts and burns he now carried on his arms. People only saw courage, and while they weren't wrong, they didn't see the whole truth. Outside his apartment, reporters gathered, cameras ready, microphones in hand. They shouted his name as he stepped outside for the first time that day, their voices overlapping with questions. How did you find the strength? What went through your mind when you ran into the fire? Do you think of yourself as a hero? He froze, overwhelmed. He had never been in front of cameras before. He wasn't a man who liked attention. All his life he had been invisible, and suddenly the world was looking straight at him. I just did what needed to be done, he said softly, his voice hoarse from the smoke and from nerves. That officer needed help. Anyone would have done it, but the crowd knew better. They had seen the video. They had seen how everyone else stood frozen while he was the one who acted. The internet had already crowned him a hero. Hashtags with his name were trending. People were creating artwork, editing his photos with captions like "Bravery lives among us" and "Ordinary man, extraordinary courage." He returned inside quickly, shaken by the noise outside. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like himself, just a man who had been in the wrong place at the right time. Yet no matter how he felt, the world had already decided who he was. At work, his phone rang constantly. His boss called, not with anger about his absence, but with awe. "You've made us proud," the man said. "Take some time off. The city is talking about you." On the news, anchors replayed the video again and again, their voices filled with excitement. Some experts praised his bravery. Others debated whether people like him represented the true spirit of humanity. The clip of him dragging the officer away from the flames was shown beside inspirational music, shared not just locally but around the world. That night, as he sat in his apartment with the blinds closed, the weight of it all settled on him. He had never wanted fame. He had never wanted strangers to know his name. And yet here he was, the subject of a story that refused to die down. And then came the strangest part. His phone rang again and again, not just with messages of praise, but with requests. Companies wanted to interview him. Schools wanted him to come and speak to children about courage. Some people even offered him money, sponsorships, television appearances. It all felt unreal. But through the noise, one message stood out. The rescued officer's family had posted online, thanking him publicly. "He gave us our son back," they wrote. "He gave us a father, a brother, a friend. We can never repay him." Reading those words, he finally allowed himself a moment of quiet pride. Not because of the fame, not because of the headlines, but because he had given life back to someone who might have lost it. Still, as night fell again, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was not over. He had thought the story would end the moment he left the burning car behind. But the truth was, the story was only beginning. The world had seen him. The world had judged him. And the world had chosen to call him a hero. But tomorrow the world would surprise him again. Tomorrow a phone call would come, one he never expected, one that would change everything in his life. The night after the rescue had been restless. He tossed in his bed, the glow of his phone lighting the dark room. Every time he checked, there were more messages. Strangers thanking him, people calling him a hero, reporters asking for interviews. He wanted to turn it all off, but curiosity kept dragging him back to the videos, the headlines, the endless comments. The whole world seemed to know his name now. Yet he still felt like the same ordinary man who had walked into the fire without thinking. By morning, his phone rang again. At first he thought it was another reporter, another stranger demanding his story. He almost didn't answer, but something inside told him to pick it up. "Hello?" he said, his voice tired. The voice on the other end paused for a moment before speaking. It was deep, rough, but filled with emotion. "This is Officer Daniels," the man froze. His heart skipped. He knew that name now. It was the name of the officer he had pulled from the burning car. For a moment he couldn't speak. All the noise of the world faded. All he could hear was the sound of the officer's breathing through the phone. I don't know how to thank you," Daniel said finally, his voice shaking. "The doctors told me I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. My kids, my wife, They still have me because of what you did. How do I thank a man who gave me my life back? The man swallowed hard, words sticking in his throat. You don't have to thank me, he said softly. I just did what needed to be done, but Daniels wouldn't let it go. No, you did more than that. Others stood back. You went forward. That wasn't luck. That was courage, and I can't let it end there. There was silence for a moment, heavy and meaningful. Then Daniels continued, his voice steadier now. I've spoken to the department. I want you to come in. We want to meet you properly. We want to talk to you about a future. The man blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. A future? Yes, Daniels said firmly. We've seen who you are. You're the kind of man we need. You don't wear a badge, but you carry the heart of one. We'd like to offer you a chance to join us to train, to take this courage you showed and turn it into something lasting. The man sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor, his mind spinning. Him? A police officer? It sounded impossible. He had always been ordinary, invisible. He wasn't trained, he wasn't special. And yet hadn't he just done something extraordinary? Hadn't he already proven to himself and to the world that he had what it took? He hesitated. I don't know. I've never thought of myself that way. Daniels chuckled softly, though his voice was still weak. Neither had I once. But the moment came and you proved yourself. Think about it. Not many people are given a second chance at life. You gave me mine. Let me help you find yours. The words sank deep into the man's heart. He could almost see it. Him in uniform, standing tall, serving others, using the same courage that had carried him into the flames. For the first time in years, he imagined a life that was more than just survival, more than just quiet invisibility. Tears filled his eyes, though he didn't let them fall. I'll think about it, he whispered. Daniels replied softly. That's all I ask. And no matter what you decide, know this. You're already one of us. Badge or no badge, you're a brother now. When the call ended, the man sat in silence for a long time, the phone still in his hand. The room around him felt different, heavier, brighter. He realized that yesterday he had been ordinary. Last night he had been called a hero, and now, today, he had been offered a future he never dreamed of. He didn't know what choice he would make, not yet. But he knew one thing for certain. That phone call had changed everything. It had opened a door to a new life. One that was waiting for him to step through. And whether he accepted or not, nothing would ever be the same again. The morning after the call felt different. The world outside looked the same. Cars honking, people rushing to work, children laughing on their way to school. But to him, nothing was the same anymore. The quiet life he once lived had been shaken, torn open, and a new path now stood in front of him. He sat at the small table in his kitchen, his untouched tea growing cold. His phone lay beside him, still buzzing with messages, but his mind was far away. Officer Daniels' words echoed in his ears. You're already one of us. Badge or no badge, you're a brother now. All his life he had felt ordinary, invisible. He had walked through crowded streets without anyone remembering his face. He had worked jobs that barely mattered, gone home to an empty room, lived days that blended into each other. But now strangers called him a hero. Children sent drawings of him standing tall in front of flames. Families he didn't know wrote to him saying, "Thank you for reminding us there are still good people in this world." He didn't understand how one moment could change so much. He hadn't gone into the fire for glory. He hadn't thought about cameras or headlines. He had only thought about a man's life hanging by seconds. Yet that choice had carried him here, to this moment, where the world no longer saw him as ordinary. As days passed, he visited the hospital. Officer Daniels greeted him with a smile, though he was still weak. The officer's family surrounded him, tears in their eyes, shaking his hand again and again. They treated him not like a stranger, but like family. The gratitude in their faces was more powerful than any applause. Because of you, Daniels whispered, his voice breaking. I get to go home again. I get to watch my kids grow. That's not something I can repay. But I can give you this. My friendship, my respect, my promise that your courage will never be forgotten. The man nodded silently, his throat too tight for words. When he stepped outside, reporters were waiting again. Cameras flashed, microphones stretched forward. Will you join the police force? They asked. Are you going to be honored by the city? What's next for you? He didn't know the answers. He only knew that life had given him a choice once again. just as it had the night of the fire. That night, alone in his apartment, he thought about his life. He thought about all the years of being invisible, all the times he wondered if he mattered. And then he thought about the moment in front of the flames, the moment where fear had told him to run but courage had told him to stay. That moment had proven something to him. He mattered. For the first time he saw himself differently, not as a man drifting through life but as a man who had faced fire and chosen to act. He realized that perhaps bravery wasn't something you planned for. Perhaps bravery was simply choosing the right thing when the wrong thing would be easier. The next morning he made his decision. He called Daniels. His voice was steady. "I've thought about it. If the offer is still there, I'll take it. I want to serve." There was silence on the other end, followed by the officer's warm laughter. "I knew you would. Welcome, brother. This is the beginning of something bigger." And just like that, his life changed. Training would not be easy. Wearing a badge would come with challenges. But he was ready. For the first time in years, he felt alive with purpose. The man who once felt invisible had found a new identity, not given by wealth or fame, but forged by fire and choice. When people looked at him now, they didn't just see an ordinary man. They saw proof that anyone, no matter how unnoticed, no matter how simple, could become a hero when the moment demanded it. And so, his story, which began on a lonely drive home, ended with a new beginning. A man who rescued a cop from a burning car, a man who once lived quietly in the shadows, stepped forward into the light of a future he had never imagined. The fire had tried to take a life that night. Instead, it gave birth to a destiny,